To me, it means that you have some sort of restriction, either mentally, physically, sensory, intellectually, and you're unable to perform the same tasks that someone like me could do. But what I've learned working in this space for quite a long time is that it's only your environment that really makes you disabled. And if you can focus on changing that, then your disability transforms into a different ability than other people. And to me, that's kind of where the focus should be as we head to government. So New Zealand First policy has always starts from a practical place, and that's how I got involved. Many people know me from the chairperson of Greerton Village School. We have the highest number of special needs children in the entire country at a primary school. So we have significant financial constraints that come with that because of the way that the funding works. And that's kind of how I got involved in politics, really, in this space, in the disability space. And that really comes to looking at how the Education Act is designed, which is supposed to give every child an equitable, and be able to attend their local schools. However, the funding model doesn't really support these children to be supported. So my background comes from my daughter, Punver. She has autism, but our delivery at Tauranga Hospital was quite traumatic for her, so she sustained an injury to the head. And had I known what I know now when she was born, I think our pathway may have been different. Some of the things like a child with an injury who is born that way, or an injury where there's ACC involved, how the funding is different. So a lot of the focus that we're doing with New Zealand First is looking at taking all these silos and pockets of funding and seeing how we can work smarter with it. To me, there shouldn't be a child who has one diagnosis that's covered fully by ACC to attend school, and another child who has the exact same diagnosis who was born that way only be covered 2 hours a day at their local school. So there's a real inequitable support when you look at education. So New Zealand First is really committed to better universal design, and I talk about this in business, and I see a lot of these issues when I look at different designs, whether it be from the public sector or the private sector. And where it really fails is that when you're trying to do universal design, for example, we can use the Tauranga crossing. I was with a family there who pulled into the handicap space, and they couldn't open their door because someone put a trash can right there. That is bad universal design, because someone should have thought, if we have a handicap spot here close to the door, we should be able to get in and out of the vehicle if there is someone in the back seat with a wheelchair. So universal design is really made by getting the right people around in the room, having focus groups. It's not a bunch of experts and consultants. It's not even people like me, but it's bringing you guys into the conversation so we can start to co-create and develop kind of a better society that we have, and find out, where the gaps are and how the government can come in and support you. Over the years, what I've decided to stand is there's been a lot of talk about education or all of these different policies that they want to do, but as a businesswoman, if you're going to be putting in money into the education system, I would think the first step you need to do before you design a plan is to figure out how many children actually need support. Because until you know that number, it's very difficult to start to figure out what the needs are. And so where New Zealand First has been going is trying to identify that number and get that real practical stuff so we can start to change not only kind of the past history, but really come into a new area as we move forward. COVID has shown us a lot of things. For example, if you have a support care worker, a lot of people were left all by themselves because they couldn't get the support care worker to come in that first instance. So that has also changed. The government did recognize that and put in places to ensure that doesn't happen again in the future. And this is all a learning curve for us as we go through life after COVID, especially in the disability sector. That's really where I guess come in, and that's where my benefit is with New Zealand First, is that I want to bring that practical focus, understanding what the needs are of people, and actually getting us all around the table together, because I see a failure in previous times, and I think we can learn from it for the future, where if we can all start to sit down and collaborate together, and it's not a party line, because I think every party up here would say that the disability and the seniors and every sector is very important. Education is very important. None of us will disagree with that. But where we will have different views is how we approach that. Oh, thanks. And so New Zealand's first approach is very practical. It's getting people at the table. We've done significant investment when it comes to learning support, mental health. We've just announced $10 million this morning for Gumboot Friday that we're going to be doing, which is around mental health and counseling, things like that. So our focus is really on the ground and building the ground back up and making it more and equitable and a better place for everyone to live, not just, me. So, thank you.
And to answer your questions, come along to this discussion. What's disability mean to me? I'm sure that there's many definitions, probably better technical ones, I suppose, layperson's term. When I think about it, I think about not being able to do the things that you want and that you need to do. It's sort of kind of that simple. And, I know we can learn a lot from people with disabilities. We've heard there's so many people, 1 in 4, with disabilities, whether it's grace, tenacity, gratitude, humanity, it's incredibly important. When I think of disabilities, I think of one of my children who we didn't know when Natalie was pregnant, but was born with incredibly bad club feet. And we know the truth of that is if he was born, even probably 30, 40 years ago, he would have very severe disabilities. But I'm just so grateful to an amazing health service and the agencies that meant that while he still has pain and some issues, they're nowhere near as severe as they would have been. And that kind of leads me to what the second question is, how do we support people with disabilities? And I think it's ultimately, you've answered it in the question about ensuring that people with disabilities, whether relatively minor through to very significant, can live fulfilling good lives. And I think, as Erika said quite rightly, everyone on this stage will have that aim, and it's really about getting through how we perhaps differ in terms of how we do that. I believe it or not, like a lot of what the compere said, it's a really important point when we're talking about disabilities to think about the fact that 1.1 million New Zealanders, at 24-25% of New Zealanders, have a disability of some form. I think you also made an incredibly valuable point that in Tauranga that will be higher proportionately, because as he said, we have more Māori as a proportion of our population. We also have more seniors, which again we know as people get older means more issues and disabilities. In terms of what we do, I think it's pretty simple. Look, if I learned one thing as leader of the opposition, you've got to have a plan. Actually, a bad plan sometimes is better than no plan. And so we need to have a strategy in this area. And national, actually, it took us a while to get there, but we had very clear strategies around employability. Was one of our strategies, and also enabling good lives. And that was effectively making sure we partnered with the NGOs, with the sector, with people with disabilities and government to get more choice and more control, more opportunities. And actually, I think it's critically important, more employment for people with disabilities. Because that leads me to something I think is a very powerful point in all of this. And that's that if you are disabled in New Zealand, 23% are in employment. If you're not disabled, that number leaps to 70%, actually about 69.9%, but who's counting? And so that gives us a 47% disabilities employment gap, if you like. And when you look around the world, actually, if you think about the likes of the UK, that's more like a 30% gap. That's still too high, but it's better than we've got. If you look at countries like Sweden and France, some of those other countries, it's more like 10%. And so I think we need policies that are ambitious in reducing that gap, because we know from every survey, frankly just from talking to some of you in this room, that with the right job, you want to be in work, and that will lead to better lives. well, I'm sure as we have questions and stuff, get through other policies and so on. What I'm particularly proud of for National, because I've seen the effect of it not far from here, actually 17th Ave, is the quite high number of people who need cochlear implants in Tauranga. And literally it's amazing when you meet someone, a young woman I can think of, who couldn't hear a thing, and yet with the implant suddenly they can hear the birds sing, and it just adds so much to their life. One of our policies is say that I was part of formulating would mean we'd more than double the number of cochlear implants in New Zealand. Look, we need to do many more things than that, but as I say, I look forward to a great discussion today and the chance to talk a bit more about some of those policies from National's perspective. Thanks very much.
Right, well, we're certainly not like the Conservative Party of Canada. Hi, I'm Margaret Colmore, new Conservative candidate for the Bay of Plenty. I'm a proud wife and mum. I've been in business most of my life, and currently we run a bed and breakfast in Oropi, giving guests a country experience. About 2 years ago, I became concerned at the direction that New Zealand is being taken down. Schools teaching gender ideology to young children, that they might be in the wrong body, that gender is on a sliding scale. Freedom of speech being attacked by the anti-hate speech laws about to be passed. The scientific truth about climate change being suppressed and manipulated to bring about a global agenda of a one-world government. To dismantle capitalism and bring in socialism. And we all know socialism doesn't end very well. I joined New Conservative because of those reasons. I joined New Conservative because of their focus on strong families and on the value of life. Freedom of speech, lower taxes, less regulations, smaller government, and a greater attention to genuine democracy. Now, I've been asked a question, what does the word disability mean to me? To me it means a mental or physical disability. It means a challenge. And it's not that disability defines you, it's ultimately how the challenge of how you cope with that challenge that defines you and that makes you who you are. The second question is, how would New Conservative best support people with disabilities to live a fulfilling life? Well, firstly, we stand for life, the very sanctity of life. The sanctity of life from the womb to the tomb. And that is why we are so strongly opposing the changes to the abortion law that now have made an unborn baby the same status as a gallbladder or an appendix, and now legalises abortion to full term. The new law has removed the previous 20-week time limit for disability abortions. In the UK, there is an increasing numbers of late-term abortions just for cleft lip and for club foot. New Conservatives will make it a coalition condition that this law be repealed. And because we stand for life, we also say no to legalising euthanasia, assisted suicide. This is a slippery slope, and once that law is passed, it will be expanded. The right to die will become a duty to die, and this will affect those with chronic conditions, disabilities, mental illnesses, those simply tired of life, or even children. We are committed to increasing funding for the best palliative care possible. And what message are we giving our youth who are committing suicide? That it's okay to take your own life? No, we value life. Everyone's life has value. Medicinal cannabis is legal, already legal. We say no to legalising recreational cannabis, as today's genetically modified marijuana has a far higher THC content and can cause major depression and major addictions. Teenagers who start smoking cannabis before the age of 17 are 7 times more likely to commit suicide. And I find it ironic that the government will invest the profits from legalising it back into mental health. I say, why create the problem in the first place? New Conservative is about real democracy,
Hope for tomorrow and fresh thinking. Real democracy by having a binding citizens-initiated referendum to hold government to account when bad law is passed during the 3-year term. Hope for tomorrow. New Conservative will remove gender ideology being taught in schools and make parents important again. Parents must know what is being taught to their children. And hope for tomorrow that we are one people and should be treated as equals, regardless of age, gender, capability, or ethnicity. One law for all. Fresh thinking, as a New Conservative will introduce income splitting, which splits a married couple's income, significantly reducing the couple's tax burden. There are many more things I can say about what New Conservatives stand for, and I guess it's not really covering exactly what you wanted me to tell you today, but I can't give you all the answers. All I know is that New Zealand is going down the wrong path, and we need to be aware of that and make some firm decisions this election year. We support farmers and uphold the fantastic job they do, providing food for over 40 million people. We should be supporting them, not penalising them with excessive taxes, and because of that, we will pull out of the Zero Carbon Act. And lastly, we ask for your for your vote for our party that will make parents, children and families important again. Party Vote New Conservative for fresh thinking, real democracy and hope for tomorrow. Thank you.
I'm Chris Jenkins, standing for the Opportunities Party in the Bay of Plenty seat, the suburbs of Tauranga. My colleague Andrew Kai wasn't able to make it this morning, but is standing for Tauranga Central. Just to correct a point there before jumping in, I'm very familiar with the Green Party tax policy. I love a lot of what you do. However, the GMI would actually take money back away for people who start working, so it's not a universal basic income. To define disability, about 6 years ago, I had a motor scooter accident on a 50cc scooter. It's my first time in the newspaper actually. And I flattened myself. I broke both my legs. I've got metal in both my legs. I had an implant in my wrist. I was in a wheelchair, and it took about 6 months working hard to get back out of the wheelchair through crutches, and I made it to the top of the mountain, and it was hard work. In that time, I noticed a lot about how people look at me change. There was time that I was in the wheelchair because it was a rough day as I was making my road back to recovery. And I noticed at the supermarket, it was really different how I was treated if I was in the chair or if I was on crutches. If I was on crutches, everyone would ask me, "Oh, what happened?" It seems temporary. If I was in the wheelchair, people would talk to the person behind me. I learned a lot about being in a wheelchair, about the gap when you go into a lift. How high it is to get up. I learned a lot about Cameron Road and Fraser Cove when you've got those really sideways footpaths that you have to work so hard with your left hand when you're going along, and that was the one that I'd broken. That's what disability means to me, is when you are unable to engage with society like somebody else might. So this could be physical, and this is something I've obviously been able to relate to from my own experience. Many of my family and friends have had trouble with various levels of mental disability, whether that's temporary or stress or anxiety, the ones that everyone kind of thinks could happen to them, so they care so much more about, or whether it's something that's more permanent that doesn't feel like it could happen to me, so they're kind of over there somewhere. And as I've kind of worked through these situations, and the same with a lot of other things in society, it's like there's a them and an us for many things as I've engaged with politics, especially so in the last few months. There's a them and an us. So the us that many people talk about is things that they could see happening to them. There's funding for anxiety and stress because that's something people can see happen to them as they work hard. There is support for people who have lost their job from COVID at double the base benefit as those who had lost their job the day before that, because that could have happened to them. But if they lost their job before that, their job nudges, they don't deserve our help. The Opportunities Party, writes quite detailed policy, as you may have come across if you've read any of that details. In the disability space, our health policy talks about adopting the provisions of the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, which you may be familiar with. And to go into the detail of a few of the questions we were asked, this means that all public spaces must be accessible physically to people who are physically unable to make it. It means that accessibility to information, so the COVID briefings would have information available to those who are blind as well as those who may be hearing impaired. Accessibility to employment and interviews, being able to stand up and partake in society on an even footing. Accessibility to transportation. The last point I wanted to make is the universal basic income, thank you. And the main piece of that is it replaces the current benefit system with one that will reward everybody. So carers, $250 a week tax-free goes to everyone. It recognises the unpaid work in our society. And for people who are just starting to get into work, if they're on a benefit and starting to work, that does not drop away. There's a massive pullback under the current benefit system. When you start to work, it's not actually worth your time financially to take more hours because the benefit drops the same way, same rate as your wage goes up. Exactly the same happens under the GMO that the Greens are proposing, except for longer. The universal basic income provided by TOP, you will keep that and it makes work worthwhile. Vote Opportunities Party, thank you very much.
Josh Cole tuko ingoa ko Green Party candidate for Tauranga te mahi ko Tauranga moana te taha. Hello, my name is Josh Cole. I'm your Green Party candidate for Tauranga election. On my bit of paper it said Bay Tinetti. Not that I'm going for the electorate vote, don't really, I was just asking for party vote. My upbringing in the serenity of nature was life-saving. I enjoyed undiagnosed autism, a broken family in the late 80s, early 90s reforms that caused great social pain. Fortunately, I was born a white homosexual male growing up in nature, in CIS as well. I learnt in my tertiary studies of sustainable horticulture that the multiple crises we see today can be avoided if the environment, economy and society are equally considered in all high-level decisions. My undiagnosed autism marred my career in retail, so I formed a passion for workers' rights. And so from that I went back to study and I gained an applied science degree at the Uni of Waikato. But the lack of suitable jobs and autism diagnosis, getting married and having 2 children helped me decide to get back to my sustainable horticulture roots and become a self-employed landscape gardener. That way I don't have to have 6 bosses who do not understand autism. My autistic children are lucky to be born in a more autistic friendly world. There's a whole lot more information out there these days. The science has come a long way, and so has the attitudes of society that is still going. My life has fueled my passions for the Green Party issues: nature, agriculture, social justice, inequality, and workers' rights, as well as being a small business owner. I feel that autism and discrimination is like other social injustices, and that I'm passionate about. So I'm asking for the party vote, as I said before. So I was asked a question: what does disability mean to me? I have autism. Apparently, disability, although I don't really see it as it's a gift. Many things I'm really good at, but other things I'm absolutely hopeless at. Yeah, my wife has also got a disability. She was one of the same kind of people. Tell me what it was. But suffice to say that she identifies with that building over there, CCIE. Yeah, my 2 girls have autism as well. One was diagnosed, she was 2 years old when she was diagnosed, and we were lucky that we went to the Bay of Plenty Polytech childcare centre, where the teachers there had extra training for autistic kids. So that was a stroke of luck. My older girl, she has only just been diagnosed a few weeks ago, and also she's got dyspraxia as well. So we're in the deep end, we're on a steep learning curve, and we're just finding out. Yeah, there's a long way to come. Yeah, we should all have access to warm and dry housing, good healthcare with resource public services. We also need a strong safety net to look after us when we are out of work as we age or have a disability. We are proud of how people have risen through the huge COVID challenge. It shows that we must now look after how we look after each other, and that we are compassionate and believe that everyone should thrive in the communities, no matter who they are. Despite working hard, many of us are doing it really tough. Without urgent action, we risk entrenching inequalities and losing futures to this crisis. If not in lives, then in rights, opportunities and dignity. We understand that it is only by rewriting the rules that we can advance resilient communities that give everyone an opportunity to fill their potential.
It's fantastic to be here. This sector is one that I'm absolutely passionate about. I have lived experience, not personally lived experience, but lived experience through my sister, who lives in supported living, has been in a wheelchair for the last 25 years, I think, and lives in Christchurch. And got to see her in her lockdown last week, the week before when I was down there. And just always reminds me when I'm there, it grounds me about how different the world is for her. And that's where my basis for my definition for disability comes from, is from her and those kids that I've taught along the years as well, that it's not their impairment that is the disability, it is the world that becomes a disability. Exactly as Erika said, it's the environment that they live in that becomes that disability. It's the society that makes that disability. And I love in the Office of Disabilities that they talk about the world we live in has been designed by people who assume that everyone is the same. And it's that trying to fit that square peg into that round hole all the time. And that's where I believe the absolute disability is. And Chris, I couldn't agree more. I've been spoken to so many times over the top of my sister when we've walked into shops, and I just get so angry when that happens. But I also think that there's a really good place for education in that space as well, and that's not happening fast enough in this country to absolutely educate everybody about disability. So this government is committed to building an inclusive and accessible Aotearoa. It is really important, and I'm one that's standing there all the time asking about what policies, making sure that our policies and our legislation going forward is incredibly inclusive. I'd have to say that it's been said here on the stage this morning that we're actually all very much on the same page, and I think that the legislation that I've been involved in the last 3 years, which has been the most rewarding, has been the legislation that has pertained to the disability sector. The legislation like the Margaret Treaty, where the braille books have been made more available to people with sight disability. And every single party in Parliament, not just government, but every single party is on the same page. And that is where we don't see a lot of differentiation. It's actually bipartisan politics, and it's politics working and Parliament working at its absolute best. But we want to take that further as a Labour Party. We want to continue on the work that we've built over the past 3 years, and I will acknowledge the previous government as well. As Simon said, the Enabling Better Lives was actually a really good piece of work that we've been able to build on. And again, I go back to the fact that parties will actually work together in this particular space because we want to see the best for our disability community. And I don't get this wrong. Oh, Josh, you're not even anywhere near it. Oh, here we go.
I do like using that because I do know that there's lots of people that have hearing difficulties, and even though I've got a principal's voice, I do like to actually make sure that everyone can absolutely hear. We've put in a lot of supporting documents over the last 3 years that will ensure that legislation absolutely is embedded, or policy and practices are absolutely embedded, including the Disability Action Plan that was launched in November 2019, which presents the priorities, and that was co-designed with the disability sector. But on top of that and supporting that, we've got the Learning Support Action Plan and the Disability Employment Action Plan that was announced just in the last few weeks. And that's something that I'm really passionate about, is ensuring that we have pathways for people who have disabilities into employment. Part of that is actually looking at things like the alternatives, and we've started this work, alternatives to the discriminatory minimum wage exemption. That is really important. It is important that people with disabilities actually have equal employment opportunities, greater than equal employment opportunities, but also are not actually being marginalised because there's been a minimum wage exemption at the same time. So work is being done in that space, and watch this space because Labor does have an announcement to make, which I'm not making here this morning, but we will be making an announcement in that space. We also have been working with the Access Alliance on developing accessibility legislation, and that's hoped to be passed within the first few months of if Labor comes back into government, and we've afforded that opportunity in passing that legislation. The next Labor government will continue to champion these important platforms for people with disabilities, and particularly people that the wider whānau as well. So we look forward to working with you in future.